President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. Several of my Republican colleagues have mentioned that some of us came out in opposition to Judge Kavanaugh almost immediately after he was nominated by the president. It's true. Count me in. I was one of those people. And I say that without any apologies whatsoever, because I was familiar with the record of Brett Kavanaugh on the court where he sits. I was familiar with his record as a member of the Bush administration. Didn't have all the information, but I surely had enough to understand that if confirmed and seated, he would be absolutely a member of the hard right majority, which has done so much harm to the people of this country over the last many years. So right off, within 24 hours, I was opposed. And that was exactly the right decision. And that is why I will vote tomorrow against the seating of Judge Kavanaugh. Now, many people in this country do not fully appreciate the role that the Supreme Court plays in our lives. They know what the president does. Maybe they know what Congress does. They don't know what the Supreme Court does. So I would suggest, Mr. President, that in North Dakota and in Vermont and all over this country, you got people who are saying, what kind of corrupt campaign finance system do we have? Not just progressives say that, conservatives say that, Republicans say that, Democrats say that. Who believes that in the United States of America, a handful of billionaires, some Democrats, mostly Republicans, can spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates who represent their interest? Who thinks that's right? Not many people do. But people do not understand that we are in that position today because of a 5-4 Supreme Court decision regarding Citizens United, a decision which is now undermining American democracy. And there are those who think that Citizens United did not go far enough, that billionaires should be able to give money directly to senators and congressmen, make them directly their employees. I have zero doubt that Judge Kavanaugh will continue that majority approach to allowing billionaires to control our political system. 1965, an enormously important act was signed by Lyndon Johnson called the Voting Rights Act. And it said that all of our people, regardless of the color of their skin, should have the right to vote. Not a very radical idea. And yet a few years ago, the majority of the court gutted that decision, said it wasn't necessary anymore. States would do the right thing. Time has come and gone. Days, hours after that decision was made, 5-4 decision, you had attorneys general all over this country, governors, working overtime to figure out how they could suppress the vote, how they could make it easier on themselves to deny people of color, poor people, young people, the right to vote. That was a Supreme Court decision. So if you're upset and you're wondering about how in America we have states trying to make it harder for people to vote, when our voter turnout numbers are pretty low compared to the rest of the world, that was a Supreme Court decision. I have zero doubt again that when it comes to protecting our democracy and the rights of people to vote, that Judge Kavanaugh will be on the wrong side of that issue. Today in America, we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. The Affordable Care Act was an important step forward. By a 5-4 decision, Supreme Court ruled that expanding Medicaid in a state was optional. And we had many, I think 17 states that said, no, we're not going to expand Medicaid. Millions of low-income people, children, were denied the health care that this Congress voted to give them. I have zero doubt that Mr. Kavanaugh will continue that effort to make it impossible for us to guarantee health care to all of our people. Janus decision, attacking unions, 5-4 decision. Muslim travel ban, 5-4 decision. So I didn't need to hear about the issues of sexual assault in the beginning, before it arose. I knew that this nominee would be highly partisan, and that was only confirmed more strongly just a couple of weeks ago when he went before the Judiciary Committee again. So that is issue number one. And if any of you are out there who are now dealing with cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or other life-threatening illnesses, understand that Republicans in a number of states in this country are trying to get the United States Supreme Court to rule that major parts of the Affordable Care Act are unconstitutional, including the protection of people who have pre-existing conditions. So if you're struggling out there with diabetes, with cancer, heart disease, serious illness, worry, and worry a lot about what Mr. Kavanaugh will do with the other 4 members of the hard right in taking away your ability to get the health care you desperately need at an affordable cost. If you are a woman, or in fact a man, or in fact 70% of the American people who believes that a woman has the right to control her own body, and you don't want to see Roe versus Wade overturned, and that is the last poll that I saw had some 70% of the American people holding that opinion, worry and worry a lot, because I fear very much that if a case, and we think a case may come before the Supreme Court on Roe versus Wade, worry about what Kavanaugh will do with the other 4 right-wing members of the court. So that's issue number one. If in fact Brett Kavanaugh was a choir boy, if in fact he was one of the most wonderful human beings ever to walk the face of this earth, based on his policies, based on his decisions, I would vote against them. But, Mr. President, it turns out that maybe he has not been a choir boy. And I could only concur with my colleague from New Jersey, Senator Booker, in expressing what we are hearing in our own office. I come from a small state, Mr. President, and yet as a result of Dr. Ford's testimony, we have received comments from 11 Vermonters who relayed, to some degree, their stories about sexual assault. We received a letter from a woman who was 70 years old who told us about a horrific experience that happened to her when she was 14 years of age. And while almost all of the comments came in were from women, there were some from men who were abused as boys. Some 20 to 25% of women in this country have been